An entitled young man sprawled across two seats, his limited edition sneakers propped up on the reserved spot opposite him, tainting the worn fabric with grime from the city streets. Jason Statham, looking like just another weary, 60-year-old commuter in a simple wool coat, calmly pointed. "Excuse me, that's my seat." The young man smirked, deliberately grinding his heel into the cushion. "Looks taken, Grandpa," he sneered, enjoying the attention from other passengers. But he had no idea who he was talking to. Before I tell you what those words were that changed everything, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. The train car was a rolling capsule of dusk, carrying its cargo of tired souls home through the sprawling city. The rhythmic clatter of wheels on steel tracks provided a hypnotic beat to the evening commute. Outside the windows, the city lights of London began to blur into streaks of neon and gold, painting fleeting murals on the glass. Inside the carriage, the air was thick with the scent of damp raincoats, lukewarm coffee, and the collective sigh of a workforce heading home. Passengers were lost in their own worlds, scrolling through phones, staring blankly into the middle distance, or dozing against the vibrating panes. It was a scene of mundane, everyday transit, a perfect backdrop for the ordinary to collide with the extraordinary. The antagonist was anything but ordinary in his presentation. A young man in his early 20s, he was a walking billboard for contemporary hype culture. His jacket, a garish collaboration between two luxury brands, was unzipped just enough to reveal a tangle of silver chains. On his feet were a pair of box-fresh, ridiculously expensive sneakers that he clearly valued more than the comfort of his fellow travelers. Massive noise-canceling headphones engulfed his ears, leaking the tinny beat of a drilled track into the otherwise quiet car. He was absorbed in a video on his phone, occasionally letting out a loud, obnoxious laugh, completely oblivious to the silent annoyance radiating from those around him. He wasn't just occupying space, he was conquering it, claiming it with an air of unearned superiority. Then, Jason Statham stepped into the frame. He was the antithesis of a young man. At 60, his hair was more silver than not, and the lines etched around his eyes spoke of a life lived, not curated. His dark wool coat was practical, not fashionable, and he carried himself with a quiet, grounded stillness that drew no attention. He looked like a retired architect or a history teacher, someone who had earned his place in the world without needing to announce it. His gaze, sharp and intelligent, swept the carriage for a seat, his movements economical and precise. There was a power in his calmness, a coiled energy beneath the surface that only the most discerning I would notice. His eyes landed on the only available spot, the one currently serving as a footrest for the young man's designer sneakers. Statham approached without hesitation and stopped. His voice was low, clear, and polite, yet it cut through the low hum of the train. "Excuse me, that's my seat." He indicated the ticket reservation tag above the seat. The young man slowly lifted his head, a look of theatrical disbelief on his face. He slid his headphones down around his neck. "What was that?" "That's my reserved seat," Statham repeated, his tone unchanged. There was no anger, no impatience, just a simple statement of fact. The young man looked from Statham's weathered face to the reservation tag, then back down to his own pristine shoes. A smirk spread across his lips. This was a game to him, an opportunity to perform. "Doesn't look reserved to me," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Looks like it's reserved for my feet. Find somewhere else, Grandpa." A few teenagers in the back of the carriage snickered. Other passengers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the brewing conflict but unwilling to intervene. Statham's expression remained placid, but his eyes, a piercing shade of blue, held the young man's gaze. "I'm not going to ask you again." This was the final prompt the young man needed for his little show. He laughed a loud, grating sound. "Or what? You gonna tell my mom on me?" He shifted his weight, deliberately pressing his dirty sneaker sole harder into the fabric, leaving a visible smudge. He wanted everyone to see him dominate this old man. Statham didn't say another word. In a move that surprised everyone, he simply lowered himself into the seat anyway, his large frame settling directly in front of the young man's outstretched legs. The sneakers were now pressed firmly against the wool of his coat, inches from his lap. The carriage grew quieter. The air crackled with tension. This was not the reaction the young man had expected. He had anticipated shouting or a feeble retreat. This calm, unyielding presence was infuriating. It was a silent challenge. "What the hell, old man?" he snarled, losing his cool. "Get off me." He pushed his feet forward, trying to shove Statham back. "I said get off." The whispers in the carriage turned to gasps. The young man was now physically assaulting him. Statham's eyes, which had been fixed on the window, slowly turned to meet the aggressors. They were cold, devoid of emotion, like chips of ice. He spoke, his voice barely a whisper, but carrying an incredible weight that seemed to suck the air out of the car. "Last chance. Move. And if I don't," the young man began, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and bravado. He never finished the sentence. Statham's hands moved with a speed that defied his age, a blur of motion too fast to properly track. One hand shot out, gripping the young man's ankle in a vice-like hold. With a single, fluid twist and a brutal yank, Statham pulled. The young man let out a strangled howl as his body was wrenched from its comfortable slouch, sliding unceremoniously from the seat and crashing hard onto the grimy floor of the aisle. The entire carriage gasped as one. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the young man's pained groan. Statham rose to his feet, towering over the pathetic figure on the floor. He placed his foot gently but immovably on the young man's chest, pinning him to the ground. The lesson had begun. The shock in the train car was palpable. It was a collective, sharp intake of breath, followed by a silence so profound that the rhythmic click-clack of the wheels on the track sounded like hammer blows. Passengers who had been pretending to sleep were now wide awake, their eyes locked on the scene in the aisle. Phones, which had been discreetly lowered, were now raised again, their small red recording lights blinking like a swarm of fireflies. The young man lay on the floor, his bravado shattered, replaced by a mask of stunned disbelief and searing pain from his twisted ankle. His expensive jacket was now collecting dust from the floor, and a dark stain was spreading on his designer jeans. Jason Statham stood over him, not with the manic energy of a brawler, but with the terrifying calm of a predator that had just effortlessly neutralized a threat. His foot on the man's chest wasn't a stomp. It was a placement, deliberate and heavy, a physical punctuation mark to his earlier warning. "You thought this was your seat," Statham said, his voice low and gravelly, easily carrying through the silent carriage. "You thought humiliating people made you strong." He pressed down just enough to elicit a wince. Respect isn't taken by bullies. It's taken back from them. He removed his foot. For a moment, the young man just lay there, panting, the dual fires of humiliation and rage building in his eyes. He could hear the whispers now. He could see the smirks on the faces of the teenagers who had been laughing with him moments before. He was the butt of the joke. Scrambling awkwardly, he pulled himself back onto the seat, trying to regain some semblance of dignity, but it was impossible. His face was flushed a deep crimson, a stark contrast to his pale skin. Humiliation like this doesn't just sting, it poisons. And the poison was demanding an outlet. "You think you're some kind of tough guy?" He spat, his voice trembling with fury. He was talking to Statham, but he was performing for the entire car, trying to claw back his lost status. "You think you can just assault me in front of all these people and get away with it?" Statham didn't even grant him a full glance. He had already returned to his seat, looking out the window as if the whole affair was a minor inconvenience, now resolved. He rested his hands on his knees, his posture relaxed. This dismissal, this utter lack of concern, was more insulting than any physical blow. It communicated in no uncertain terms that the young man wasn't, and never had been, a threat. He was an annoyance, now swatted away. That final, silent insult shattered the last of the young man's control. With a roar of pure frustration, he launched himself from his seat. His shoulders slammed into the vertical metal pole beside him in his haste, the dull clang echoing his clumsiness. The train swayed slightly, and a few passengers gasped as coffee sloshed. "You made a mistake," he screamed, his face contorted. "I don't care who you are. I'm gonna break you right here." Statham finally turned his head. His eyes moved slowly, heavily, as if weighing the man's soul and finding it wanting. "Seat down." The command wasn't shouted. It was spoken with a quiet finality that froze half the onlookers in place. But the young man was too far gone, blinded by rage. He swung a clumsy, powerful haymaker, aiming for Statham's head, putting all his weight and momentum behind it. Gasps filled the carriage. A woman screamed, "Stop him!" But there was no need. Statham moved like water flowing around a rock. His left hand shot up not to block the punch, but to meet it, catching the fist in his open palm with a loud slap that stopped its momentum dead. In the same fluid motion, his right hand clamped down on the man's exposed wrist. He twisted, sharply. A sickening crunch, loud and wet, echoed in the stunned silence. The young man shrieked, a high-pitched sound of agony. Statham used the man's own forward momentum against him, yanking him forward and down. His face connected with the solid steel pole he had just bumped into. The impact produced a sickening metallic clang, and blood instantly erupted from his nose, splattering across his shirt and the pole. The crowd recoiled. Phones captured every gruesome detail. The young man staggered back, clutching his face, his other arm hanging uselessly at his side. You broke my nose," he wheezed, tears of pain and fury streaming down his cheeks. "My wrist." Statham rose slowly from his seat, his full height seeming to fill the aisle. His coat fell open slightly, revealing a frame that was solid, powerful, and utterly formidable. "You broke your pride," he corrected, his voice flat and cold. "The rest is just a consequence." Desperation gave the young man a final surge of adrenaline. He swung his good arm, a wild, uncoordinated blow. Statham slipped it with contemptuous ease, his elbow snapping forward in a short, brutal arc that connected squarely with the man's ribs. Another crack, this one duller, more sickening, rang out. The man gasped, the air driven from his lungs, and he folded in on himself. As he doubled over, Statham's knee came up, a piston of force that smashed into his chest, sending him stumbling backward into a row of seats. The young man collapsed across the lap of a startled woman, who shrieked and shoved him off onto the floor. He scrambled back to his feet, wheezing, his face a mess of blood and tears, his expensive clothes ruined. Fury, raw and primal, still burned in his eyes, but it was the fury of a cornered animal, not a predator. It was no longer about dominance. It was about survival. His eyes darted around, looking for an equalizer, for anything that could bridge the terrifying gap in skill between them. His gaze landed on a heavy, stainless steel water bottle that had rolled out of the passenger's bag. He snatched it up. He gripped the bottle like a club and swung it wildly, a desperate, whistling arc through the air of the train car. Passengers screamed and cringed away. The bottle was a real weapon, capable of causing serious damage. Statham, however, remained a picture of calm efficiency. He didn't retreat. He flowed under the swing, the metal bottle passing harmlessly over his head. As he came up, his palm struck the inside of the man's wrist with surgical precision. The nerve screamed, the hand went limp, and the steel bottle clattered loudly to the floor. Before the man could even register the loss of his weapon, Statham's boot followed through, a powerful stomp not on the man's foot, but on his ankle, the same one he had twisted earlier. A raw, agonizing scream tore from the young man's throat as his ankle gave way completely. He crumpled, his body contorting as he fell backward, slamming hard against the train window. The thick glass rattled violently in its frame, threatening to shatter, but it held. He slid down to the floor, all the fight draining out of him in one ragged, painful gasp. He was done. The passengers' hands were shaking, but the phones remained steady, recording. And then, something shifted in the atmosphere of the car. The fear and shock began to morph into something else. A slow, rhythmic sound started from the back, a single voice at first, low and reverent. Statham. Another voice joined in. Statham. Then another and another. It grew from a whisper to a murmur, then to a chant. Statham. 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 It was a spontaneous, unified chorus of approval, a public verdict being delivered in real time. They weren't just watching a fight anymore. They were witnessing a reckoning. The man on the floor, sweat and blood dripping onto the ground, heard the chant. His eyes, cracked with desperation, looked up at the figure standing over him. Pride, that stubborn, toxic pride, burned hotter than reason. You don't scare me, he croaked, the word a pathetic lie. You're nothing, nothing. Statham's face, which had been a calm, unreadable mask, sharpened. His eyes narrowed to a knife's edge. He closed the distance in 2 measured steps, and his hand shot out, gripping the collar of the man's designer jacket. With a terrifying display of raw strength, he hauled the man up from the floor and slammed him back against the row of empty seats. The entire frame creaked and groaned under the force. Passengers scrambled further away, giving the spectacle a wide berth. You thought humiliating me made you strong. Statham's voice boomed now, a controlled roar that easily cut through the chant, the engine noise, and the terrified man's ragged breathing. He punctuated his words by slamming the man against the seats again, even harder this time. The man's head lolled back. But arrogance doesn't make you strong. It makes you weak. Slam. The third impact was the most brutal. And weakness like yours. Statham leaned in close, his face inches from the man's, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. Always breaks. He let him go. The young man didn't just fall. He crumpled, his body folding in on itself as he slid into the aisle, a boneless heap of misery. He lay there, groaning, clutching his ribs, too broken in body and spirit to even try to rise. The chanting stopped. The bus fell silent for a single, dramatic heartbeat. The only sound was the pitiful, wheezing breath of the defeated bully. Then, the carriage erupted. Cheers, whistles, and thunderous applause shook the walls of the train. The chant rolled through the car again, stronger and more triumphant than before. Statham, Statham, Statham. Jason Statham calmly adjusted his coat, straightened his collar, and, as if nothing had happened, returned to his seat. He sat down, folded his arms, and once again turned his gaze to the window, watching the city lights flash by. The train rumbled forward, each jolt of the wheels an echo of the adrenaline still coursing through the passengers' veins. They had just witnessed something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. The arrogant young man remained a crumpled heap in the aisle, a living monument to his own foolishness. His designer clothes were now just stained rags, his bravado replaced by the whimpering sounds of pain. The constellation of phones remained fixed on him, capturing the pathetic aftermath. Whispers flew between seats, excited and incredulous. I can't believe it. Did you see that wrist lock? That guy didn't just pick the wrong seat, he picked the wrong planet. At the next stop, the automated voice announced Canary Wharf, and the doors hissed open with a sigh of compressed air. For a long moment, the humiliated man didn't move. He lay there, trembling, perhaps afraid to stand, to expose his broken state to the unwavering gaze of Statham and the dozens of recording phones. Finally, prodded by the weight of 100 stares and a few pointed jeers, he began the arduous process of getting up. He staggered to his feet, wobbling like a man 3 times his age, clutching a pole for balance. His body was bent, his arrogance not just shattered, but annihilated. A passenger near the door muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Get out, you clown." Another added, "Next time, buy a ticket for your ego too." Laughter, sharp and merciless, rippled through the car. The man's cheeks burned a shade of red that clashed horribly with the blood still streaking from his nose. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were fixed on the floor as he stumbled down the steps and onto the platform, disappearing into the cold night like a phantom, chased away by his own public disgrace. The doors closed, sealing him out. And just like that, he was gone. The carriage erupted once more in applause and cheers. Before the train had even reached its final destination at London Bridge, the video was already going viral. The first clips, shaky and raw, hit social media with the force of tidal wave. By the time the passengers disembarked, headlines were being written. Commuter chaos. Train bully gets brutal lesson from Jason Statham. Move your feet, Grandpa. Arrogance meets justice on the Jubilee line. Exclusive footage, Statham in action. The comment sections exploded. I'd pay good money to watch this on a loop. The way he just sits back down at the end, legendary. That wasn't a fight. That was a masterclass. The dude didn't just lose the fight. He lost his dignity for the next 50 years. By morning, it was global news. Millions had seen it. News anchors debated the ethics of public justice. But the overwhelming sentiment was clear. A bully had gotten exactly what he deserved. The young man became an internet ghost, his face a meme for arrogance and instant regret. Friends ghosted him, embarrassed by the association. Strangers would point and sneer, pulling out their phones to replay the video of his humiliation as he walked by. His arrogance had been surgically removed, leaving only a raw, exposed nerve of public shame. Back in the quiet of his London home, Statham poured himself a cup of Earl Grey tea. His movements were slow, deliberate, the very picture of calm. His agent, a sharp woman named Eleanor, raised an eyebrow as he settled into a leather armchair. "Rough night on the tube, Jason?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. She'd already seen the dozen videos sent to her by the studio. Statham shrugged, taking a sip of his tea. Just another fool who mistook silence for weakness. She smiled faintly, knowing him well enough to leave it there. "Did you teach him anything?" His eyes, sharp even in the soft light of the kitchen, lifted to meet hers. "I always do." For Statham, it was never about the fight itself. It was about the principle, the lesson. And that night, the lesson had been delivered not just to one arrogant young man, but to the millions who would watch. It was a stark reminder that true strength doesn't need to be loud. A week later, Statham was walking down a quiet Mayfair street when a young man, no older than 20, nervously approached him. "Mr. Statham," he stammered, clutching his phone. I saw the video. What you did on that train, man, that guy had it coming. But how did you stay so calm?" "I would have lost my mind." Statham stopped and studied the young man for a long moment before answering. His voice was soft, but carried the weight of experience. "Anger is easy," he said. "Arrogance is even easier. But control, that's strength. Anyone can start a fight. Very few can finish one before it truly begins." The young man nodded, his eyes wide, as if those words had planted something profound within him. Statham gave a slight nod and walked on, his shadow long in the evening light. The lesson, he knew, would always continue. This was never about fists or blood. It was about the fundamental difference between the brittle shell of arrogance and the solid core of respect. And everyone who had seen it, on the train, online, on the news, would remember the day a fool put his feet on Jason Statham's seat and learned the brutal, unassailable truth. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned. Or in this case, it's taught. This wasn't just a conflict on a train. It was a profound metaphor. True strength is never loud. It's found in calmness, discipline, and the resolve to defend one's dignity when necessary. Arrogance is a castle built on sand, destined to be washed away by the first wave of reality, while respect must be earned through action or, in some cases, learned through a painful lesson. Have you ever encountered someone who mistook silence for weakness? What would you have thought if you were on that train, watching this unfold? Do you think our modern society needs more of these straightforward lessons to correct disrespect in public spaces? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear your perspective. If this story reminded you that true strength lies in inner peace, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about unexpected heroes. Share this video with someone who believes that respect has to be earned the hard way. We read and value every single comment. More stories about justice being served are waiting for you on your screen. Click to watch those next. And we'll see you tomorrow with a new story about an underestimated woman who completely turned the tables.